Somewhere in Guildford, England, in the autumn of 1993, a teenager is awake at midnight staring at a spreadsheet. There are over 1,000 numbers in it. Each one covers something about how a small, imaginary person thinks, how hungry they are, how thirsty, how happy, how likely they are to queue for a roller coaster versus wander towards the exit and leave. He runs the simulation, watches the little people move. Something is wrong. Too many of them are getting sick, or they're all heading for the drink stand at once, or the park is turning a profit too easily and it doesn't feel real. So he finds the number, adjusts it, makes a note, runs it again. He is 17 years old. He's supposed to be taking a year off before university, and without quite meaning to, he is building the foundation of a career that will end 30 years later with a phone call from Stockholm. This is the story of Theme Park, and of the person who made it come alive. Join us as we queue for our favorite ride on today's trip down Memory Card Lane. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I hope these words find you well. Hello and welcome to the 302nd episode of our video game history podcast, A Trip Down Memory Card Lane. Each week, we'll tell you a story relevant to the current week in gaming history. It can be about a game or the people who have created it. It can be about a console or the technology that brought it to life. We often talk about the companies that bring it all together, making our hobby video games a reality. We'll tell you each story. We hope to teach you something new about the topic, what it took from the world as its inspiration, or what it gave back to the world in its legacy. Today, we are looking back at Theme Park, the 1994 construction and management simulation from Bullfrog Productions that handed players a blank plot of land, a few £100,000, and the keys to their own amusement empire. Designed by Peter Molyneux and built by a 17-year-old programmer named Demis Hassabis during a forced gap year before Cambridge, the game created a genre, sold 15 million copies, and proved that there was an enormous audience for games about making things rather than destroying them. It also turned out to be the first chapter of one of the more remarkable careers in the history of science. I'm David Caston, and as always, I am joined by my co-host, who I have absolutely no doubt would open his park with the best of intentions. Price the entry tickets fairly, build a beautiful layout, personally ensure every ride was well maintained, and then quietly realize somewhere around year 3 that he has been making the fries less salty than he could have been this entire time. And then feel genuinely conflicted about what to do with that information. He's my brother, Rob Caston. Rob, be honest. Are you the kind of theme park owner who figures out the salt trick on day 1, or the kind who reads about it years later and has to sit with what that says about you?
I'm actually very lost if this is something to do with the game or not.
100% it has to do with the game.
Okay, all right. Well, I'm a salty motherfucker, so I guess I don't know.
If you're a salty motherfucker, what do you typically need alongside salty things?
Something refreshing.
Yes. So if you make your fries saltier, then what happens?
People are thirstier.
Yeah, you got it. You would be a great theme park owner. You'd be fantastic. You would have figured out the salt trick on day 1, my friend.
If you say so, Dave.
So, based on your answer, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that you have never experienced theme park in any way, shape, or form.
Nope, theme park is one that escaped me. I Roller Coaster Tycoon is about the extent of any theme park related. Well, actually, I guess you count Zoo Tycoon or Jurassic World.
Did you ever do Planet Coaster?
I tried Planet Coaster once,
Mm.
but I didn't get very far. I think it was crashing on my computer at the time or something. I don't remember, but there was some issue that I had that I was like, I don't care enough. But yeah, no, theme park is not one that has crossed my playlist. So going in completely blind, other than Peter Molyneux.
Yes, we have extensively covered Peter Molyneux. We are not focusing on him today. Rather, some of the other team have much more interesting careers. Not much, I wouldn't say much more interesting. Let's just say careers we haven't covered. So we're gonna cover a different career today, and I'm really excited about it because I did not see it coming. Um, with that being said, I am a huge theme park fan. This was one of those games that I put countless hours into when it came out. This would have been one of the earlier games that I would have got into in terms of like construction management. And it probably very much set off my love for tycoon games because after theme park, I used to want to buy every single game with the word tycoon in it that let me manage things. And now here I am 40 some years later, still managing things. So thanks, theme park. Um,
Yeah, indeed. Thanks, theme park.
but I love this game. Absolutely adore theme park. I don't even want to think about how many hours I put into this because it would be a lot. Uh, I'm thrilled with the game, know nothing about its story. So today we're all going to learn about its story. But before I get there, before I start to, take that trip down memory card lane, why don't you share with our listeners what else happened during this week in gaming history?
All right, well, kicking it off on June 8th, 1999, Conker's Pocket Tales was released for the Game Boy Color, developed and published by Rare. It was the first game to star Conker the Squirrel as its lead character, following his debut as a racer in Diddy Kong Racing 2 years earlier. Played from a top down perspective in the style of The Legend of Zelda, the originals, not Ocarina of Time, the game sent Conker across 6 worlds to retrieve his stolen birthday presents and rescue his kidnapped girlfriend Barry from the evil acorn. The cartridge was dual format, running on both the original Game Boy and the Game Boy Color, and kept things firmly in family friendly territory. A notable contrast with what the Conker series would become just 2 years later. Conker's Pocket Tales is still the only entry in the franchise built for younger players, and it stands today as a quiet footnote to one of gaming's more dramatic character transformations.
We have no clue what they're talking about. Go check out the episode on Conker's Bad Fur Day to know what they're talking about.
Yes, exactly. Go find it in our show notes. Not
Go,
not show notes. Go find it on our website or on
yeah,
Spotify or wherever you listen to podcasts.
good plug.
Yeah.
Good job. Proud of you.
Yeah. Gross. Disgusting. Anyways, June 9th, 1999, Shadowgate 64 Trials of the Four Towers was released for the Nintendo 64, developed by TNS Co. and Infinite Ventures, and published by Kemco. It was a sequel to the original Shadowgate, the 1987 point and click adventure originally released for the Macintosh and later ported to the NES, set a century after the events of the first game. Where the original used static first person screens to navigate its cursed castle, Shadowgate 64 replaced them with full 3D environments, casting players as Del Cottonwood, a halfling imprisoned by bandits who escapes into a mystery spanning 4 towers. The game received mixed reviews, with critics divided on whether the transition to 3 dimensions had served the series or simply exposed how much of the original's atmosphere had come from what it left to the imagination.
We had the original on NES, and it was very frustrating because I was too young to understand the puzzles. I don't think I ever beat it. I don't. Well, we both know I never had a Nintendo 64, so I never played this one. I don't know if there have been any others since then, so this might have killed the series. I could be wrong on that. Someone fact check me. Okay, good talk.
Yeah, go do that. I won't because instead I'm going to talk about the next topic when on June 12, 2001, Half-Life Blue Shift was released for PC, developed by Gearbox Software and published by Sierra Online. It was the second standalone expansion for Valve's landmark 1998 first-person shooter, and it had an unusual origin. Blue Shift had originally been developed as part of a Dreamcast port of Half-Life that was eventually canceled as the console struggled in the market. Rather than discard the work, Gearbox released it on PC as its own product. The expansion returned to the Black Mesa Research Facility and to the same catastrophic Resonance Cascade event at the center of the original game, this time through the eyes of security guard Barney Calhoun, a face familiar to anyone who had played the original, now finally given his own story. Blue Shift received mixed reviews, with most critics finding it shorter and less substantial than Opposing Force, Gearbox's first Half-Life expansion, but appreciating the new perspective on events players thought that they already knew.
You know, I'm trying to think of a game earlier than Half-Life that I remember like extensively expanding the way it did. And I'm coming up empty. I'm sure that there were others, but for me, that was one of the first games that I ever encountered that just kind of came out with all these expansions, to expand the story.
I never did Half-Life, so I
Yeah,
just
what the heck?
any expansion is an expansion. You learn more. It might be short, but hey, the original was shorter without it.
The original was short. They've modernized it. Black Mesa is the name of it. They've redone it in a modern engine. You should try it sometime for historical sake.
I'll check it out and see, and if I find it on sale, I'll definitely be interested because I'm
Okay,
cheap.
I know.
On June 9, 2005, Killer 7 was released for GameCube and PlayStation 2 in Japan, developed by Grasshopper Manufacture and published by Capcom. Directed by Goichi Suda, better known as Suda51, and produced by Resident Evil creator Shinji Mikami, the game followed an elite group of assassins called the Killer 7, physical manifestations of a single man named Harmon Smith, operating through a dark alternate history in which world peace had been achieved through the banning of nuclear weapons, airplanes, and the internet. Its gameplay combined on-rails movement, first-person shooting, and light puzzle solving in ways that divided critics sharply, with some praising its visual style, cel-shaded aesthetic, and willingness to be genuinely strange, and others finding its stripped-down controls frustrating and its story impenetrable. Killer 7 was part of the Capcom 5, a set of GameCube exclusives overseen by Mikami, and was the first of the 5 to release. It sold modestly, but found a cult following that eventually prompted re-releases of several of Suda51's older Japan-only games, and helped pave the way for No More Heroes in 2007.
It's a weird game. Suda's a cool game designer. We've never covered him before. We will at some point, but he's weird, and I like him. No, he's not weird. He's great. His games are weird. Let me rephrase that.
Yes, please.
Okay. There, clarification.
Thank you.
Okay.
You should put that first, and then my response, and then your answer.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Get right on that.
All right, Dave. With that, we're going to hit our last topic for this week in gaming history with June 10th, 2010, when Xenoblade Chronicles was released for the Wii in Japan, developed by Monolith Soft and published by Nintendo. Originally announced at E3 2009 under the title Monado, Beginning of the World, the game was renamed Xenoblade to honor franchise creator Tetsuya Takahashi and his long history with the Xeno series of games. Set across the bodies of two colossal titans frozen in combat, the game followed a young man named Shulk, wielding a sword called the Monado, as he sought revenge against a race of mechanical beings called the Mechon. Its real-time combat system, seamlessly explorable open world, and rich layered score, composed by a team that included Yoko Shimomura and Yasunori Mitsuda, drew wide acclaim in Japan. Its path to Westerners was slower. Europe received it in 2011, and North America had to wait until 2012, after a fan campaign called Operation Rainfell drew enough attention to prompt a limited release. It is today considered one of the finest role-playing games of its generation.
They're definitely on my to playlist. I've never played the Xenoblade series, and I feel bad about it constantly, and I need to change that for sure.
Yeah, the only thing I know about Shulk and the Monado is from Smash Brothers. So maybe I owe Xenoblade a play. But
Role
we say that
playing
with a bunch of
isn't
games.
role playing isn't a big genre for you. It's not a non-existent genre. It's just not a big genre for you.
Yeah, we're gonna ignore what RuneScape is for a moment there. Yeah, you're right.
That's MMORPG. I think that's different.
Hey, you know what the last 3 letters of that are?
You don't like single player story. Oh, you do Skyrim. Okay, color me corrected.
Anyway, Dave, I don't
What
think
what
people are
else?
here to talk about my RPG playing.
No, no,
I
no,
think
no.
we're
They
here
are.
for
They
another
are.
topic.
They absolutely are. What other RPGs have you played?
Star Wars KOTOR. Not KOTOR.
No.
What's the
Yeah.
one, the online one? Is it
Yeah,
KOTOR?
well, it's the Old Republic.
Okay. ESO.
You played ESO.
Yes, I
Nice.
did.
Okay. You played that Lost Ark.
Dragon Age.
Yeah, you played Dragon Age. That's true. Okay.
All right. If you want to go far back, I even played freaking the Mana Garden.
Okay. Okay. All right.
You
I
want
guess
to stand
nope.
corrected, and let's
Nope.
get on with today's topic.
I missed it. I missed all of it. You must have played that before I knew you.
Yeah, in the 10 years you just disappeared off the face of the earth.
That's exactly what I did. By 1993, Bullfrog Productions had a reputation that was hard to earn and easy to understand. Peter Molyneux and Les Edgar had built the studio from nothing in Guildford, England. We've told the full story of how that happened back in episodes 107 and 145. The short version for today is that by the early 1990s, Bullfrog was the most respected game studio in Britain. They had invented a genre with Populous, they had released Syndicate, and they had built a culture around a simple idea. Show us what you can do, and you can work here. Molyneux ran tutorials in gaming magazines teaching people graphics and programming tricks. Some of those tutorials ended with a job contest. The message was as clear as it was unusual for a professional studio. You too can make games. That message reached a 16-year-old named Demis Hassabis. Hassabis had grown up in North London, the son of a Greek father and a Chinese Singaporean mother. And from the time he could hold a chess piece, he was something that people around him struggled to categorize. He learned chess by watching his father play against his uncle. By the time he was 13, he had reached master standard with an ELO rating of 2300. I put that in there for you, Rob.
Holy fuck.
What's your rating again? Mine's 2, right? We've established that.
No, I think you're like a 500, maybe 600, but like, yeah, no, I'm 1,000. Holy fuck, man.
Yeah. Smart guy.
By 13, what the? All right, anyway.
He bought his first computer with chess tournament winnings, a ZX Spectrum 48K, and taught himself to program from the books, from the magazines, from everything that we're talking about. His first program, an AI program, was written on a Commodore Amiga. It was a version of the board game Reversi. He completed his A levels 2 years early at 16, and then Cambridge University, which had accepted him, told him to take a gap year because of his age. Right?
Wow. Hey, we want you, but you gotta wait.
Yeah, wait a year. You're in. Wait a year. So he entered a competition in Amiga Power magazine. The prize was a job at Bullfrog. His challenge, the challenge, the challenge was to design a game based on Space Invaders. Hassabis submitted an entry called Chess Invaders. He finished third, which, as it turned out, was good enough. Bullfrog brought him in anyway.
Damn.
He started with a couple of summer internships doing level design work on Syndicate and then AI programming on Populous 2. And then during his gap year, he was put to work on something new. Molyneux had an idea that he described as a simulation sandbox building game, a game where players would design and manage their own amusement park. He had a prototype with placeholder graphics. There was no AI at this point, no simulation. There was no real game. Molyneux handed it to Hassabis and asked him to figure out what it could be. Hassabis was not immediately convinced. Funnily enough, I wasn't sure I wanted to work on it, he recalled later. I was keen to make a game like Syndicate, Populous, Powermonger, and the other sort of earlier games. I was more keen to do that kind of game, maybe a strategy game. But as he started to think about what the game would actually require, he started also thinking about all the other questions, right? What would the AI need to do? What would the simulation need to model? And the more he thought about these questions, more questions came up. And then the more he thought about it, the more he realized something. This could be an entirely new kind of game. Now, business simulation games existed before Theme Park. SimCity had proven that players would manage systems rather than fight enemies. But SimCity operated at kind of an upper level, right? You were a city planner making broad decisions about zones and infrastructure, watching the results play out across a map. The simulation was about the whole, not the individual parts. Even Transport Tycoon, which released the same year as Theme Park, ended up keeping its simulation at a comfortable strategic distance. Trains ran, cargo moved. The individual person never really entered into it. What Hassabis started building was something different, something that operated at the level of the individual. Each visitor to the player's park would be a small running system. They would have their own internal state, how hungry they were, how thirsty, how happy, how tired. They would make decisions based on those states. They would navigate the park, queue for rides, buy food, get bored, get excited. Hassabis used a programming approach called finite state machines to model this behavior. Essentially, a way of representing a being as a set of conditions and transitions so that the program could ask at any moment, given what this person currently feels and wants, what will they do next? He estimated that each visitor carried roughly a dozen parameters governing their preferences and behavior. At peak capacity, the park could hold somewhere between 1 and 2,000 of them, all running simultaneously, all making their own small decisions. That meant the simulation was alive. And it meant that us, as the players, could reach into it. Now, the team took research trips to places like Alton Towers, one of England's most famous amusement parks, and they watched how real visitors actually behaved. Where did people get thirsty? When did they decide to leave? What made them queue for something they hadn't planned to? The observations fed back into the numbers, the parameters that governed each little person's inner life. And then Hassabis had the realization that would define everything. There was no point modeling all of that behavior, he thought, if the player couldn't touch it. The simulation was only as interesting as its handles. So he started building the interfaces, the adjustable knobs that let players reach down into their park and manipulate the conditions. And in doing so, he came up with the detail that would be the first thing people remembered about theme park for the next 30 years: the salt on the chips or fries. Every food stall came with adjustable metrics. A player could increase the saltiness of the fries, which would make visitors more thirsty, which would increase demand at the drink stall, which let the player charge more for drinks, which could be further manipulated by reducing the amount of actual liquid in each cup by increasing the ice.
Wow. That's a lot, and that's awesome.
This game. The simulation made this chain visible. Change one number, and you could watch the downstream consequences ripple through your park in real time. The little people got thirsty, they sought out the drink stand, your profit margin climbed. And it's just so freaking cool. It's just so cool because it's direct cause and effect, you know? When you look at it, you realize it was in ways a satire of how amusement parks actually worked, wrapped inside a simulation of how people actually behave, wrapped inside a game. And Hassabis was building the whole thing more or less as a teenager on his gap year. The development took about a year and a half in total. Hassabis spent roughly the first 6 months building the simulation itself, the behavior systems, the navigation, the underlying machinery. The next 6 months he spent building the gameplay interfaces that would let players interact with what he had made. And through it all, he ran a routine that he described later with something between pride and exhaustion. In the daytime, he programmed. At night, he played the game for a couple of hours, watching the little people move through the parks he had designed, checking whether or not their behavior felt right. Then he adjusted. The balance lived in a spreadsheet with over 1,000 numbers in it. Too many people getting sick after rides? Find the number. Are they getting thirsty too quickly? Find the number. Is the park too easy to profit from or too punishing to survive? The numbers are in there somewhere. As you can imagine, he later said, we're working on quite slow computers. We don't really have many testers around. There would be the odd intern, but we were mostly doing the testing ourselves. Now, the machines they were targeting were 486s and early Pentiums, hardware that gave the graphics engine a fixed slice of processing time per frame, with whatever remained left for everything else. Hassabis had a budget of roughly 10 out of every 50 frame refresh cycles to run all of this AI logic. The entire simulation, the behavior of up to 2,000 people, had to fit inside that window. He had to write economically, he had to write smart. There was also the question of what the game would inevitably not include. At one point, Molyneux and Hassabis hacked the save file of a 1993 game called Disney's Coaster, which was a simple 3D roller coaster design tool. And they found that they could export coasters designed in theme park into its format, then ride those coasters in a 3D engine. The hack worked, but it never shipped. You know, if there's anything we've learned about Bullfrog through all of our episodes, it's that Bullfrog was kind of full of moments like this. There are numerous ideas that got as far as functioning prototypes before the deadline uh, to release was made. Made the decisions for them, forced them to cut this kind of stuff.
Yeah, for sure.
I had Disney's Coaster too. The this is the mid 90s, right? This is the mid 90s. We've talked and talked and talked about it. The mid 90s is when 3D was becoming a thing. So the fact that I could design a roller coaster and then ride it was like the coolest freaking thing to me. Absolutely cool. My mind would have been blown if those things worked well with one another. Absolutely blown.
Yeah, it is pretty crazy. I mean, I know that was one of the things that I loved about the later roller coaster tycoons is being able to build it and ride it and see how I screwed up, how it did well. It's pretty sick.
Multiplayer was also planned, and then it had to be cut. In Hassabis's original design, the AI opponents he had built would actually construct their own parks in memory, full layouts, fully simulated. And there had been an internal debugging tool that let developers visit those AI built parks and walk through them. From that, someone had the idea, what if players could send troublemakers to each other's parks? What if a rival's security guards could be overwhelmed by your hired thugs, letting chaos spill through their carefully managed grounds? The idea had real teeth. It fit the game's satirical spirit perfectly. It was dropped 2 weeks before release because there was simply not enough time. And, we talk. I we're talking about the ice and the salt and the chips, but there was other things too. Like you had to have janitors that would clean up after your people, because if the rides were too much, people would vomit. And if there was vomit on the ground, other people would vomit as they walked past it. So sometimes you would just get this god awful chain reaction of a vomit all over the place because no one got to it in time. You had to hire entertainers to like dance and uh, you know, uh, entertain your people, would keep their attitude about the park up, would amuse them, make them want more willing to wait in lines longer. Thank you Disney and their imagination cues. Same concept, right?
Yeah.
Um, so there was just a lot of layers to this game. You had to research new rides, and that would take time, and you could adjust ticket prices, you could adjust the prices of all the food. As we noted, you could adjust the way the food was presented. There was just a lot. Like this was a pretty dense simulator for what it was. I mean, it's a colorful cartoony game, but at its heart, it's a pretty dense simulator. And it was a fantastic game. By January of 1994, the game was mostly complete. Then the release date slipped from March to June. Then it kind of slipped again. What ended up shipping in June of 1994 was the product of a year and a half of work by a small team at a studio that had told a teenager with a gap year to figure out how to make a simulation come alive, and then completely gave him the keys to the castle and trusted him to do it. Rob, hearing about Demis Hassabis running theme park at night for 2 hours, adjusting a spreadsheet of 1,000 numbers, doing most of the testing himself because there were almost no testers to speak of, it really makes me grateful all over again that the hardest part of making this podcast is literally figuring out what to say.
Yeah, no spreadsheets, no balancing the saltiness of imaginary fries at midnight.
Exactly. And that ease is largely because I use Zencaster. It's the all in one podcasting platform that takes the logistical chaos out of the whole process. You log in from your browser, hit record, and you're capturing studio quality audio and up to 4K video. There are no custom tools, no late night parameter adjustments.
What about when things go wrong mid recording? Because it's always going to happen.
Well, that's where Zencaster's multi-layered backups come in. Even if your connection drops, your recordings stay safe at the highest quality. There is no lost work, no starting over from scratch with a fresh spreadsheet.
And what about post production? Don't tell me it's a one man operation having to go on at 2 in the morning.
Oh, not even close. Zencaster's post-production tools automatically clean up background noise, trim filler words, and balance your audio. The polish happens without the grind.
And distribution?
One dashboard. Zencaster distributes directly to all the major platforms, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and more from one place. Record, refine, release.
So basically, what theme park development was not.
Yeah. Ease. Yeah. Theme park development was not easy. If you're interested, go over to zencaster.com/pricing. Use our offer code, all one word, memory card lane, and you can get 30% off the first month of any Zencaster paid plan. If you have a story to tell, Zencaster makes sure that the process doesn't eat you alive.
No midnight spreadsheets required.
Absolutely right. Head over to the Zencaster, use our code, all one word, memory card lane, and you can get 30% off your first month.
All right. So after all that work, did Theme Park land?
It landed. When Theme Park shipped in June of 1994, the reviews came back with a consistency that Bullfrog had learned to expect and never quite learned to take for granted. PC Gamer gave it a 95% and named it Game of the Month, with reviewer Gary Whitta praising its fun factor and comparing the experience to SimCity 2000. Computer and Video Games called it fun and feature-packed. Edge gave it an 8 out of 10, noting the complexity while praising the detail and the addictiveness. Mean Machine Sega, reviewing the Mega Drive port the following year, called it the most complex Mega Drive game ever created. The Saturn version, a later port, earned a 90% from Sega Saturn magazine. It got universal acclaim. The critical consensus was that something new had arrived. Not just a good game, a new kind of game. One reviewer called it SimCity with a playful spirit. Another said it felt like interacting with something real. The little people wandering through your park, thinking their private thoughts about litter on the footpath or the price of a soft drink, had convinced people in a way that was hard to articulate but impossible to miss. And the sales numbers followed. Theme Park sold 15 million copies across its many platforms and ports.
Wow. That's impressive.
And then let's talk about Japan. Molyneux had made a decision during development that cost him an artist. Gary Carr, one of Bullfrog's key visual contributors, had disagreed strongly with the direction that Molyneux was pushing for the game's look. Molyneux wanted bright, almost garish colors, and it was a visual style that was aimed specifically at appealing to Japanese players. Carr thought it was a mistake. He wanted it toned down, he wanted it more realistic. The disagreement was sharp enough that Carr left Bullfrog over it and went to go work for the Bitmap brothers. The Japanese PlayStation version of Theme Park sold 85,000 copies within weeks of its release. The game became a phenomenon in the Japanese market in a way that surprised almost everyone, except, of course, for Peter Molyneux. Carr later looked back at what he had walked away from and he called the game a classic. He actually would later return to Bullfrog in 1995 to work on Dungeon Keeper and eventually became the lead artist on Theme Hospital, which is a follow up to Theme Park. Now, the game did not perform as well everywhere. 15 million is a lot of copies, but it took time to get there. Molyneux later speculated that Theme Park's relatively soft showing at first in the United States came down to the same thing Carr had objected to, right? That the graphics were too bright, that they were too cartoonish for American audiences at the time. Whether that was the right explanation or not, the game found its audience most fiercely in Europe and Japan, and that audience was broader than anyone in the industry had thought to look for. Hassabis later reflected on this with a particular observation. Theme Park, he said, appealed to a lot of female players and older players, demographics that the games industry of 1994 had largely written off as non existent. This game was constructive rather than competitive. It was about making something, then watching it work. It was about expression and design rather than reflexes and combat. And it turned out that there were a lot of people who wanted exactly that, who just hadn't been offered it before in a form with enough depth to hold them. With these types of games, he said, you're bringing the player in as a key creative component. They're creating their own unique stories using the tools that you've given them. With Theme Park, that meant that every single person you spoke to told you about a different aspect of it that struck a chord with them. That observation about players as creative participants, about simulations as story generators, would echo through the genre that Theme Park helped create. Roller Coaster Tycoon, Rob, which you're familiar with, would arrive 4 years later to put things into perspective.
I gotcha.
Theme Hospital, which reused much of Theme Park's code and is built on its engine, shipped in 1997 and became what many consider to be Bullfrog's most beloved game. Theme Hospital's fantastic. None of the sicknesses in Theme Hospital were for real. Like they had like clown disease and like big pus. Like they were comical. It was another satire. They were so much fun. Peter Molyneux had planned a designer series, a line of simulation games that all share theme park's structural DNA. But the designer series never fully materialized as intended because at one point EA, as we know, acquired the studio. But the template survived, right? The construction and management simulation as a genre, with its systems of interlocking behaviors and its invitation to players to watch the consequences of their choices, that genre starts here, right? With the year and a half of work by a small team in Guildford, and with these late night spreadsheet sessions of a teenager who had originally wanted to make something more than Syndicate. Theme Park was also the last major thing that Molyneux made before his thinking turned in a new direction. In mid 1994, sitting in a traffic jam shortly after finishing the game, he had an idea about a reverse role playing game, right? A dungeon filled with monsters, built and managed by the player rather than invaded by a hero. That idea became Dungeon Keeper. Theme Park was, in a sense, where one creative chapter closed and another began. It was just a fantastic game, right? Like it was, for me, it started the genre. Like, this is where my love of these type of games came. I know I said that at the beginning, but I want to emphasize it. This a lot of people found their love for management games here with Theme Park and Theme Hospital and Roller Coaster Tycoon. Like, this is where it all began. So in case you're curious, here we are. This is where it got popularized. Let's say that. There were games before it that were management games, but this is where it got popularized. Like we had said, this is where management stopped being a systems thing and started being an individual thing. And it's weird because that's the way they all are now, right? Like, all these management games kind of deal with the individual. Like when you're playing Cities Skyline, you can check out individual people, and SimCity individual people. Heck, we kind of even owe games like The Sims the same concept, where we've created these finite state systems and we now focus on the individual. Like that concept kind of came from here.
Yeah, I hadn't really thought of that way till now, but you got a point, Dave.
For Hassabis, this was where everything began. He turned down a 7-figure offer to stay in the games industry after Theme Park shipped. He had earned enough from his gap year to put himself through university without financial support, and he had made a decision. He was going to Cambridge to study computer science. He left Bullfrog, enrolled at Queen's College, and graduated in 1997 with a double first. After Cambridge, he went to Lionhead Studios, where Peter Molyneux had landed after leaving Bullfrog, and he worked as the lead AI programmer on Black and White, which we covered back in episode 291. Do you remember the AI in Black and White? How revolutionary that was with the monster that learned from you and like took lead from your behaviors.
I do now, Dave.
It's a throwback where we're in that same stuff. In 1998, he left Lionhead to found his own studio, Elixir Studios, which developed Republic the Revolution and Evil Genius before closing in 2005. But Hassabis had been thinking for years about something larger than games. He went back to academia and he earned a PhD in cognitive neuroscience from University College London in 2009, studying how the brain constructs memory and imagination. He then co-founded a machine learning startup called DeepMind in London in 2010. Google purchased DeepMind in 2014 for £400 million. In October of 2024, Demis Hassabis was awarded the Nobel Prize in Chemistry, jointly with John Jumper, for the development of AlphaFold, an AI system that predicts the three-dimensional structure of proteins from their amino acid sequences. That's a problem that had resisted solutions for 50 years in that field. And this AI had the work that they put forward has significant implications for drug discovery and the understanding of disease. The Nobel Committee was recognizing his work in chemistry and biology, right? But that thread, the thread that runs from theme park to AlphaFold, it's not entirely invisible. The simulation that Hassabis built for theme park was, at its core, an attempt to model the behavior of large numbers of individual agents, each that were carrying their own internal state, each making decisions according to their own parameters, each contributing to an emergent whole that no single number in the spreadsheet could predict on its own. That was the technical challenge he had set himself at 17 in a small office in Guildford, running the simulation at night and adjusting the numbers until his little people behave like real people, right? The question he kept asking while doing that, how do you build a system that produces plausible lifelike behavior from a set of underlying rules, is not a different question from the ones he spent the rest of his career asking. The scale changed, of course, the stakes changed, the domain moved from amusement parks to proteins, but the habit of mind that theme park required and rewarded is recognizable in everything in his career that followed. Hassabis has said that it was his curiosity about artificial intelligence within gaming that went on to define his career. Theme park was where that curiosity had its first real consequences. Not in a lab, not in a lecture hall, in a simulation of a theme park, right? With 1,000 parameters in a spreadsheet and a deadline that kept slipping by, and a game that was built by a teenager who was supposed to be taking a year off. If today's episode has you wanting to spend more time in this corner of gaming history, we've got a few places to send you. Episode 145 tells the story of Populous, the game that accidentally invented the God genre and gave Bullfrog the reputation that made a teenager want to work there more than he wanted to go to Cambridge. Episode 107 follows Peter Molyneux's full career arc from those early Bullfrog days through the founding of Lionhead and the development of Fable. And episode 291 covers Black and White, Lionhead's God game that had Demis here as its lead AI programmer before he left to win a Nobel Prize. And if it's the genre that theme park helped create that genuinely interests you, way back, we're throwing it way back. We know how we feel about those, but let's throw it way back. Episode 7 is where we covered Roller Coaster Tycoon, the game that kind of picks up where theme park left off and turned the construction and management simulation into a phenomenon all over again. All of it is waiting for you at our website, www.memorycardlane.com. Rob, what else can listeners find when they head to the site?
You can find the calendar of our future and previous episode topics for this year. You can find a link to our Discord where you can chat with Dave and I. You can find a link to our Patreon where you can get access to our ad-free and unedited versions of our episodes. And you can find links to our social media where I am on several platforms as Rob_O_Raptor and Dave.
I can be found on various platforms as David is Wrong. Each week, we'll tell you one story relevant to the current week in gaming history. It can be about a game, a person, a technology, or a console. We've even covered a few places before. While telling you each story, we hope to teach you something new about the topic, what it took from the world as its inspiration, or what it gave back to the world in its legacy. When we sit down to research new topics each week, we get excited when we find out new things to share with you. It's this fantastic cycle of learning and teaching, teaching and learning, and in celebration of said cycle, we like to talk about our takeaways each week. So, Rob, what did you learn today?
Well, I think that my big takeaway, for one, having never known this game existed, I see where a lot of the things that I really enjoyed about the later roller coaster tycoons came from, and like Lemonade Tycoon with the changing up the changing the recipe of your lemonade to see how people reacted. All of the little aspects of that, and like you mentioned, the being able to control one specific person or follow them throughout their whole pathing, and then the janitors having to go around and clean up because the rides made you puke. I had no idea that all of that stemmed from another game, um, and it's kind of it's mind blowing to me that not only was it made by a game that I've never heard of, but that it was by a college student on a gap year who pretty much did most of it himself. Like those are literally the most iconic things to me when it comes to that style of game, any kind of tycoon management game, and the fact that it all stemmed from Hassabis here is just it's crazy to me. It never ceases to amaze me how some of these designers and programmers manage to make these games, and sometimes it's under the craziest of circumstances, and this one's right up there with some crazy ass circumstances, man. So pretty awesome.
Pretty awesome indeed. Pretty
So what about
awesome
you?
indeed.
What's your big takeaway?
I think it's phenomenal that the guy who made this was a 17-year-old teenager in a gap year and eventually won a Nobel Prize in chemistry. That's just I didn't go into this knowing that. I didn't go into this expecting that. If you had asked me when I started, like that's the last thing. That's the last thing I would have I would have assumed. You know what I mean?
100%. Yeah, I agree with you on that.
So I thought that was real cool, and I just thought that was really cool.
No, I definitely agree with you, man. It is very cool.
I wonder if I'm thinking about that maybe that the sick people came from Roller Coaster Tycoon, and I'm like just merging my ideas of everything. Like I know that you had handyman in this one because you had to have maintenance. I know that you had people to clean up. I know that you had people to clean up. Cleaning up was necessary, and there were guards because you could have vandals. They took that multiplayer concept and they made it single player, so you could have people that would come in and like pop balloons and steal food and beat up your entertainers. But I don't know if the nausea thing came into play until Roller Coaster Tycoon. I think I'm my brain is doing that thing where it's putting it all together. If I'm being honest with you.
I mean, whether or not that's the case, Dave, it still doesn't change the fact that a lot of the things that were enjoyed about in those tycoon games came from this, and that it was still designed by a 17-year-old on a gap year
That is absolutely
by
true.
by himself. So it doesn't take away any of that. Even if you might have gotten a little bit confused, hey, they're still all great games and something that you enjoyed or can still enjoy.
I'm old. It's okay. I get confused from time to time.
True that.
Rob, before I take it out of here and into next week, is there anything you'd like to add to today's episode?
As always, I'll take a moment to say thank you so much to everyone for listening. It means the world to us, and we hope that you appreciate joining us on this journey. So thank you.
Demis Hassabis came to Bullfrog as a teenager with a gap year to fill and a competition entry that finished third. What he found there was a concept with no blueprint, a prototype with no simulation, and a question nobody had quite answered yet. What would it feel like if the people in a game behaved like real people? Not heroes following scripts, not enemies running loops, just people. Hungry, thirsty, happy, bored, making small decisions in a world that kept score of all of them. He spent a year and a half trying to answer that question. He balanced it in spreadsheets at night. He tuned it against a hardware budget of 10 frames out of every 50. He built it small enough to fit in the memory of a machine that could barely hold it, and real enough that players felt something when the little people wandered through their parks. Then he turned down a fortune. He went to Cambridge and kept asking the same question at larger and larger scales until the answer was worth a Nobel Prize. Theme Park is a game about running an amusement park. It is also, if you look at it from a certain angle, the first chapter of one of the stranger and more remarkable careers in the history of science. The salt on the fries was always about something bigger than the fries. Next week, we're leaving Guildford and heading somewhere that understood one thing before almost anyone else in the entertainment business did: that children deserve something made specifically for them and not just a smaller version of what adults already had. Sesame Street premiered in 1969, built on the radical idea that television could teach, that the same techniques advertisers used to sell things to children could be used to give them something worth keeping. It worked. And for as long as there have been video games aimed at younger players, Sesame Street has been somewhere in that conversation. From the earliest edutainment titles of the 80s through decades of console releases, all the way to our topic, 2012's Wii game called Elmo's Musical Monsterpiece. Next week, we are tracing that whole arc: the street, the workshop behind it, and the long history of bringing its characters into games. On next week's trip down memory card lane. Do the thing.
Baby,